Good morning and welcome to Business 560, Strategic Management. My name is Matt Willard. I'll be your tour guide for this course. I wanted to just start by taking a quick moment to go through the course shell. On my courses, I'm going to flip over to the home page. Essentially everything that you're going to need for the class is under coursework. And if you click on that, you'll see the 7 weeks of assignments, 7 units, and that's really where you need to go to get to find the coursework. I post everything up front, everything is open, and so you should be able to look ahead and determine how you want to pace yourself through the course. This course is fast. It's 7 weeks. There's a lot to do, and it's really important that you not get behind in the course, or it can be very tough to catch up. The way the course is structured, you'll have a discussion board every week. It's called an issue for debate out of the textbook, and the idea here is to have you discuss a particular concept. You're required to post once an original posting, and then respond to one other student's posting. Those discussion boards are not heavily graded, but they will give you points that will help you in the long term in the class. I'm not looking for long papers for these discussion boards. A good discussion board posting might be a couple of paragraphs, not 3 or 4 pages. The main project for the term is a strategic plan. That strategic plan will be built over the course of the 7 weeks. So every week you will have a weekly term paper assignment, if you will. And that term paper assignment will in effect be one part of your final paper. So this is week 1. You have your issue for debate. You'll have your week 1 term project assignment, and then this is the full term project assignment, which is due at the end of the course. So basically, this term project assignment is your first assignment. It's due next week, or a week from Wednesday the 17th. And essentially, that will be the equivalent of a chapter in your final strategic plan project. If you do good work all week, every week, by the time you get to the end of the class, basically you'll be editing 4 or 5 papers into a single coherent strategic plan. And so it's important that you do these weekly projects as well as you can, because it will save you in the long run. The best way to get a hold of me is to email me. My email is on the syllabus. It's also on the course shell. You're welcome to get a hold of me that way. If I don't get back to you within an hour or so, a day or so, that means that I either didn't get it or I forgot, which happens once in a while. You're not bothering me. Please email me again. And if we need to get together somehow or talk on the phone, that can certainly be arranged. As I mentioned up front, this course is a lot of work in a very short period of time. My goal is not to stress you out. If you're feeling like it's overwhelming, or you're not sure what I'm after, or you don't understand the material, rather than stress out, send me an email and we'll set up a phone call, and I'll see if I can help get you on track. All right, so where do we start? So let's start with what is strategic management. Strategic management is basically the initiation of major goals and initiatives that the company decides on based on its own resources, and an assessment of what's going on internally in that organization and what's happening outside of the organization that could affect it. So basically, what do you do as a company given how well your company's performing, how good it is at certain things, and what's happening in the external environment? I boil it down to a real simple question, but hard answer, which is, what do you need to look like in 5 to 10 years to survive? What do you need to look like in 5 to 10 years to be competitive and stay in business? The world is just littered with companies that have failed because they didn't adapt to technology, for example, or social media or other things. And so the question is not, so this is 2019. What does your company need to look like in 2024 to survive 5 years from now? What does your company need to be doing in 2029 to survive? And again, if you think about companies like Kodak or Circuit City, or I'm thinking of the movie rental business, Blockbuster, all of those companies failed to adapt to changing trends, changing technologies, and are now out of business. So this is the question that you'll be coming back to over and over again, which is, don't think about 2019 and 2020. This is a strategic management class. What does your company need to look like in 2024 or 2029 in order to be a survivor? The actual process of doing strategic management, and the goal of this class is to actually hopefully give you some tools to actually do strategic management and strategic planning, really starts with three basic foundational pieces. The first piece is the analysis piece. This is the hard part, so to speak. This is where you build your foundation of information, focusing a lot of time on the internal and external environments. Internal environments has to do with the functions that the company performs: sales, marketing, HR, IT, product development, and basically how well they're performing. Are they a strength or a weakness of the company? And the external environment is all of those things outside of the company that have an opportunity, if you will, to impact on the company. And we're going to talk about that today a lot more, but things like technology, demographic changes, international economic changes, what does all that present to the company in the way of opportunities and also threats to the company's future? Once you've built that foundation, then the idea is to make recommendations, decisions, formulation of recommendations. And here we're going to talk about a whole range of strategies, including business strategy, corporate strategy, international strategy, and corporate entrepreneurship strategy. And then I'll throw in there a little bit on the web. And then finally, once you make some recommendations through that decisions formulation process, then you move to implementation. And we actually won't spend a lot of time on implementation in this course because we simply will run out of time. But how do you design the organization to to implement those recommendations? What kind of resource allocations do you need to make, and what kind of leadership do you need to have to be successful? This class, I tend to focus on the analysis and decisions, and that's where our time will mostly be spent. These following charts really kind of talk through those steps. Obviously, analyzing the organizational goals and objectives. What are you trying to get done? What is the organization trying to do? Analyzing the external environment. And again, we're going to go over that in detail here in a minute. But is the company tracking what's going on around it? Is it tracking what its competition is doing? And is it having assessments done of how those trends and changes will affect its ability to compete? We're going to analyze the internal environment. We're going to do something called a value chain analysis, where you look at all of the functions of an organization and you determine which functions are adding value to the company and which are detracting. We're going to talk about benchmarking. In other words, if you think you're good at something, are you really? Because it's all relational. And so we're going to talk a lot next week about the internal environment, the value chain, and what functions the company is good at, which ones are strengths, and which ones are weaknesses. And so the assessment of the internal and external environments basically gives you something that I'm sure most of you are familiar with, which is that old-fashioned SWOT analysis. And so the internal assessment on the left tells you what things my company is good at, what are my strengths, and what things my company is not good at, what are my weaknesses. And on the right side, we're going to look at what things in the external environment, and I don't mean the weather or climate, although that could be part of it, but what things are out there that provide opportunities for the company and provide threats to the company's future. One of the interesting things to note as you go forward is that often the opportunities and threats are the same thing, and we'll talk about that again here in just a minute. So the problem with a SWOT analysis is that once you've done it, there really is nothing, and a lot of companies will do these and they don't do anything with it. It becomes a chart on a wall saying here's the things we're good at and bad at, and here's the things that we should be dealing with. So I turn the SWOT analysis on its head, so to speak, and turn it into what cleverly I call it TOES analysis. And this is where you can start to turn that foundational analysis effort into recommendations. And the idea is to say, okay, how do we use our strengths to take advantage of our opportunities? How do we take advantage of our strengths to overcome weaknesses and threats? How do we shore up our weaknesses to take advantage of opportunities? And how do we shore up our weaknesses to minimize threats? And again, we'll go through some examples of that. But the point is that as you move into making decisions or recommendations and decisions, it should answer one of these four questions. And so if you're, a local bank and you decide that one of the biggest threats out there is that they're hackers and you're worried about being hacked and fraud, that's a huge threat. And if the bank has a weakness in IT, then you're down here in the bottom right corner saying, how can we shore up our weakness to minimize that threat? The idea, though, is that when you make recommendations, they should be tied back to your SWOT analysis in this way. So once we have that foundation, and we're now looking at the TOES matrix, what are the strategies that we're going to look at? And they include a functional business level strategy, corporate strategy, international, entrepreneurial, and web. Business level strategy really asks a simple question, which is, how do we compete? Do we compete on price? Do we compete by differentiated products? Are we focused on a niche? And again, we'll spend time on that. The way I ask this question is, why do people give you money for your product or service? Is it because you're the nicest guy on the block? Is it because you have the best product, the cheapest price? What is your competitive advantage? Why? How do you compete? And we will be asking, given that SWOT analysis, is that still the right strategy? Corporate level strategy asks a different question. It really asks the question of, are we competing in the right businesses? In other words, if we're in the athletic shoe business, should we also get into the t-shirt and sweatshirt business? Are we in the right businesses? Apple is now getting into gaming. They're moving from industry to industry. So given that SWOT analysis, given the foundational research that we've done, are we in the right business? Should we diversify in some way, either through products or through mergers and acquisitions? Likewise, what's our international strategy? How do we get into the international market? Should we be doing more? Should we be doing more in particular countries? This will again come out of that analysis that we've done at the beginning of the class. And then entrepreneurial strategies, this has to do with creating new ventures and new products, but doing it internally. I tend to also think about entrepreneurial strategies applying to all of those functions in the value chain that we'll get to in a few weeks. But do we have a company that's creative, reinvents itself over time, and has the ability to bring new products to market and create new ventures? And then finally, I think we'd be remiss to not acknowledge the fact that the web and social media and digital stuff is real. And here, does my company have an appropriate strategy in that area? And if so, great, how can we build on it? If not, how do we fix it? And so when you go back to my TOES matrix, it looks like this. So now within each of those boxes, you have 4 or 5 different types of strategies that you can look at to come up with recommendations. So you can say, okay, I have a strength in this area. I can use that strength to take advantage of an opportunity. And here's how I'm going to do it, either at the business level, the corporate level, the international level, and here's the specific recommendation that I'm going to make. The idea behind all this is to give a tool that you can actually do and use to do and kind of institutionalize strategic management. It starts with building your SWOT analysis. It goes through the recommendations or the decision formulation process and then recommendations, and those recommendations being based on your strengths and weaknesses and the opportunities and threats. Now that was a fire hose of information, and I don't expect you to remember any of that, because now we're going to basically start the process of going through those steps. One of the things that you'll need to do in this term, and you'll have to do it right away, is pick a company or an organization for your strategic plan. I don't have a strong preference for who you pick, but you should pick a company or an organization that that you either know something about, that you work for and can get lots of information, or one that's publicly traded so that there's lots of information on the internet about them. There are cases at the end of the textbook which have a lot of detail on a whole bunch of companies, and you could certainly use one of them, because that would at least give you a starting point of information for your project. What you can't do is pick a company that there's no information on. You do not want to start your term paper with the sentence that says, I picked this company, it's really interesting, except I couldn't find any information on it. And believe it or not, I've had students do that, and you don't want to be in that situation. So pick a company you can either get information on, you know a lot about, you work for, or that is publicly traded. And also, it does not have to be necessarily a for-profit. You could do the University of Sioux Falls, for example. You could do a nonprofit in the local community. Theoretically, I've had people do projects on their church and church expansions and private schools. Pick something you're interested in, but pick something that you can get lots of information on. If you're not sure if there's information out there, Google it. Google your company name, Best Buy in the news, or Best Buy current events, something. Go ahead and Google it to see what's out there on your company, and make sure that you pick one where there's plenty of information, and combine that with something that you're going to be interested in, because you're going to be buried in this company or organization for the next 7 weeks. All right, so again, that's the whole class in 5 or 10 minutes. If you didn't really grasp all of that, don't panic. The main thing is to recognize that we're going to be stepping through each of those areas through the next 7 weeks of class, and you're going to be building a strategic plan covering those areas for a company of your choice. So let's get right into the content of the course. The first piece of this is to analyze the external environment of the firm. So what is going on here? What are we talking about? Well, basically, the best companies and the best CEOs are always looking at what's going on outside of their company, looking for warning signals, looking for changes, looking for opportunities, because the one thing we know for sure is that change is constant. And whether it's technology change or any other change, those kind of changes can dramatically impact your ability to basically thrive and survive over the next 5 to 10 years. The SWOT analysis is the basic technique for analyzing the firm, which we're not going to do this week, but the industry conditions and the external environment. The external environmental conditions are equal to the opportunities and threats. And so we're going to be looking at those developments in the general environment and in the competitive environment, which present opportunities and threats to your organization. And the internal and external environments must be considered simultaneously, hence that TOES matrix that we just talked about. So here's your tool. So when you're looking at the general environment, what do we look at? And here are 7 areas that you should consider: the demographic, sociocultural, political, legal, technological, economic, global, and competitive industry environment. When you're thinking about the external environment, not complicated, go through each one of these and determine what the trends are in those areas that may have an effect on your company in the future. And I'll give you a clue: if you don't know what they are, or you can't think of them on your own, that puts you in good company, by the way. Google it. It's not complicated. Put into your search engine demographic trends in 2019, or sociocultural trends in 2019, or technological trends in 2019. You'll have lists and lists of things that potentially could affect your company. Your job is to go through those lists, and out of all 7 of these areas is pick 4 or 5 things that are the primary external forces that could dramatically affect your company for good or for bad in the next 5 to 10 years. Demographics are easily understandable, and there's tons of data on the, you've heard about the aging population in this country, the rising affluence, but the dramatic separation of the wealthiest 1% from everybody else. Diversity in our population. One of the things that we talk about is the fact that by 2050, over half of the working population in this country will be non-Anglo. If you have a business in Los Angeles, your target market is already half non-Anglo. The world, the country is changing in terms of the ethnic composition. I'm not here to have a political discussion. You may not like that. It may not make you happy. You may want to build a wall. The point is that the reality is that the ethnic composition of our country is changing. There's tremendous changes in where people are living, and you can see if you are a big company planning for expansion, what region might you go to? If people are moving from the heartland into the Southwest or Florida. So those kind of things are demographic trends which you want to look at and then determine whether they present an opportunity or a threat to your company. This is one of those times where if you see, again, for example, if you see the fact that our ethnicity as a country is changing, if you see that as a threat to your company, and it also might be an opportunity for your company. It just depends on how your company responds to it. Sociocultural forces are things like women working in the workforce, the increase in two-worker families, so to speak, where the husband and wife are both working. Young people have a great concern for healthy diet and physical fitness and great concern for the environment. All of those things affect organizations and companies. Stupid examples of that, if you would, are things like the explosion of 24/7 fitness centers, or the fact that at McDonald's I can now get a tofu burger and a salad instead of hamburger and fries. Those are reactions to sociocultural trends towards a healthy lifestyle, not because McDonald's sat down and said, it's just time that we do something that's better for people. So sociocultural forces are huge. When I was a kid, stores were open Monday to Friday, 8 to 5. The weekends were off. As people have gotten busier, as both people in a couple are working, if you're a retail store and you're not open on nights and weekends, you'll probably go out of business. Okay. The fact that all of our kids are on tablets and iPads and iPhones and everything else, that is a sociocultural trend as well as a technology trend. The trend is to do business on your phone. That's a huge trend. What are you going to do about it? Is that a threat to your company or an opportunity? There's a lot of politics in the news all the time now, but there's a lot of political trends. The question with political trends is whether they're short-term or long-term. In this part of the country, we've seen the president has put in some tariffs and has created a tariff war with China. And again, whether you agree with it or not is not the point here. The point here is that if you're a farmer, it's created some difficult times for you in terms of exporting, particularly soybeans. The question is, as you're trying to manage, if you're like a soybean processing plant, is that a 1 or 2 year trend, or is that a long-term trend? We hear a lot about the Affordable Care Act and what the future of healthcare in this country is, increasing the minimum wage, all of those things, and deregulation. All of those things are political activities. The question is whether they're long-term trends. One of the biggest problems we have in this country is that companies like stability. And if you think about all of the deregulation that the Trump administration has done, if we end up with a Democratic Congress and president in 2020, all that stuff may get reversed. However, you want to look and see if there are certain trends that you think are long-term that are can't really be changed, and what kind of threats and opportunities they present to your company. Technology is obviously one that's huge, and it's not just the internet, but of course things like e-commerce, things like data analytics, things like digital marketing, social media, all of those things. But things like computer-aided design, three-dimensional printing, 3D printing, all of those things, wireless communications, nanotechnology, there's just tremendous change in technology, it seems like every week. And so you want to look at those technological developments and see how they might affect your company and whether they present opportunities or threats. An example, it's interesting. So we had a big blow up recently because General Motors declared that they're going to close a bunch of plants. They're not going to make sedans. They're going to focus on SUVs and trucks, but they're also focusing on driverless cars and electric vehicles. And there's a trend there towards more environmentally friendly vehicles, but there's also a trend there created in effect by Uber and Lyft, and now moving towards technology that allows driverless cars. And so when you think about a car company in 10 years, that car company is going to be more about software than it is about the metal and hardware that goes into the vehicle. So that's technological change that's dramatically affecting a very old line industry in this country. Again, it would be fun to debate whether GM should be doing that and closing plants and gearing up for what seems like a software-driven future for vehicles, but that is in fact what they're doing. Economically, you want to look at things like unemployment and interest rates. It's interesting, right now unemployment in this country is really low. Some of that is due to the economic growth, but a lot of it is due to the demographic changes where you have baby boomers retiring and not enough workers coming in behind them. One of the things you want to look at is, what do you think is going to happen to interest rates? One of the things that the Obama administration did in 2008, when we had the recession of that year, is the Federal Reserve said, we're going to put interest rates at 0 and we're not going to change them for a long time. Well, that allowed companies to know and have stability in interest rates, which allowed them to do certain things in terms of borrowing money. So you want to look at the economic segment. You also want to look at the global segment. Where are countries growing? Where are the opportunities out there? Where are there countries that were growing that are now not growing? Where is there political instability, and is it going to get worse? All of those kind of trends, which are important in terms of whether you go into international markets. And again, you can think about those trends like, for example, I tend to think that the next great market is going to be Africa, because it's got a ton of low-cost labor, they've got a ton of natural resources, and there's huge opportunities for growth there. At the same time, China and India have presented these wonderful potential markets for us, billions of people literally in those two countries, and the opportunity to go after what is an increasingly large middle class in those countries. But there's, at least in China in particular, some serious political issues, and the question becomes, is that really a place where you want to invest? So you want to look at the global environment and, again, look at those threats and opportunities. And those 6 areas, these first 6 are again, the book has a very good description of these, and I would encourage you to read that. Those should yield certain trends that present threats and opportunities to your company. The 7th one is the competitive industry, the competitive environment. And the competitive environment consists of competitors, of course, customers, and suppliers. And we use something called Porter's 5 Forces model of industry competition. And it's a little hard to see. But basically, this is a very old model put together by Porter, who's a Harvard professor. And it looks at the competitive environment. And what's nice about this, and again, you can Google this on YouTube if you want to hear probably a better explanation than I can give you. But if you look at the center block, it's the rivalry among existing firms. So the question becomes, how intense is the competition? If you're looking to open a restaurant in Sioux Falls or a 24/7 fitness center, the competition is intense. There's tons of them. Where would you have an industry that doesn't have that kind of competition? Well, you might look at the utility company or the telecommunications company, Midco or AllianceCom, or whoever you buy your electric power. Usually there's not a lot of competition for that. One of the things that if you are a Midco or an AllianceCom is that more and more and more, I can take care of my telecommunications need through Verizon or other wireless technologies. That's a huge threat to those terrestrial-based traditional telephone companies. So the first block is the industry competition. Then there are around it, and this is sort of describing potential threats in the industry or in the competitive environment, is the potential for new entrants. Is it easy for companies to get in and compete? If you are being successful, one thing you can guarantee is that companies will copy you. So if I'm getting into for instance, the electric car business, is it easy for other companies to get into it? If it is, that's a threat to your company. Buyers, so the bargaining power of buyers. In this day and age, buyers have more and more information about prices and costs. It's a lot easier to play competitors against each other. Companies form buyer groups so they can gain more competitive advantage. In this area, you see a lot of these local ag co-ops merging together to become bigger and bigger entities with the idea that they can form buyer cooperatives, buyer companies that have power over people, and companies like Cargill or ADM that are supplying seed and fertilizer and things like that. So you have a market increase in the bargaining power of buyers. And so if that's true, that's a threat to your company, which needs to be noticed, and a strategy needs to be developed to deal with it. Likewise, on the other side, suppliers can exert bargaining power if they have it by threatening to raise prices or controlling the quality of the products or services. Probably the best example, although it's not as effective as it used to be, and this was something like OPEC, which controlled oil. And again, the United States had a response, which is to develop its own oil reserves, and particularly up in North Dakota. And so suppliers have a lot of power when there's only a few firms dominating the industry. You can't really switch off of their product to something else. They have a supplier group like OPEC, and basically they control your lifeblood, because without them, you can't make your product or service. In a weird way, Google is a huge supplier to companies, or Amazon. And if you think about it, so Google, if you want to sell anything on the internet and you're not highly ranked on Google search engine optimization pages, for example, that's a real problem. And so the question becomes, as a threat to your organization potentially, or an opportunity if you can master it, how do you overcome that so that you're surviving in 5 to 10 years? There's a threat of substitute products and services. This is something where basically the consumer can go off and instead of buying coffee, they can buy tea. they can instead of buying McDonald's, they can buy Taco John's. There's lots of ways when you think about being in the entertainment industry, for example, the movie theater business. There's so many ways now to get movies or to spend money on entertainment that's a pretty big threat to the companies that own the theaters, and how they're going to deal with that. I think there's a case of that in the textbook, for example. If there is a high ability for consumers to substitute products and services, that constitutes a major threat to your company. And then, of course, the middle box, which is just the intensity of the rivalry in an industry. And if you have a lot of competitors in an industry, for example, universities are in this position right now. There's less and less students coming out of high school over the next 10 years. Universities are competing for those students. There's an intensity of rivalry of competitors in the college business. And you're going to see that have an effect on changing costs and different ways of getting people through the system without debt. There's all sorts of things that will happen because of that. The intensity of that rivalry is increasing. If I was doing a strategic plan for a small university or even a large university, I would view that as a threat, and I would be trying to figure out ways to combat that threat. Okay, so that's a very fast overview of the external environment. I would encourage you to read the book. I would encourage you to Google certain things like technological trends that might affect the airline industry or the fast food industry or whatever industry it is that you want to look at. And when you write your paper up, you should touch on the key trends in each of those areas. And out of those areas, the key 4 or 5 external trends that form opportunities and threats for your company. And it probably would be good to summarize those in some way in your paper. All right, that's enough for today. Get a company picked, and good luck. Again, please read the text. It'll help you clarify what I have not done in this lecture, and hopefully you can get to work on the external environmental analysis for your strategic plan.